Hello, Flavio here. You know, it's interesting. I've been a hypnotist for about 22 years and a coach. And, whenever you meet people socially, the tendency is to ask, so what is it that you do? And when you say to people socially that you're a hypnotist, a common response is, oh my gosh, you're a hypnotist. Can you really make me quack like a duck or bark like a dog or whatever the case is. And when I was younger, I used to answer, well, I guess we could talk about why you would want me to make you quack like a duck. I guess that's a more interesting conversation. But what I have noticed over the years, and recently I was at an event, and when I say to people, I'm a hypnotist, the kinds of questions that people ask nowadays are completely different. The quacking like a duck thing I haven't heard in a while. Nowadays, people ask much more interesting questions, such as, what is it like really to help a person get in touch with a part of themselves that they're not aware of, like what we call the unconscious? What is that process like really for the person, for us? So oftentimes these kinds of conversations can get really, really interesting because it is absolutely fascinating work. I mean, everybody wants to get to know themselves better. And so oftentimes these conversations go into, well, what kinds of people do you help? People with what sorts of problems or what sorts of objectives? And the usual response, well, I don't know, depression, anxiety maybe, or perhaps people who want to lose weight, those are the usual things. But it's not what we do the most of here at the office or online. What I work with the most are people who are trying to become themselves. And I know that this might sound like a weird thing because you are yourself, right? But there's a sense in which we recognize that the life we're living isn't really our lives. Now, not everybody has that sense. Not everybody has that sense. It has to do with conscience, it has to do with a bunch of other things that we can talk about later. But many people do have that sense. Well, I still have to make some adjustments. This isn't quite my life yet. And when a person has that, and I call those people those who are on a spiritual path, we call them, because they have this awareness that they're not really a physical entity. And most of what we pay attention to and find important in this life isn't really what's important to them at the end of the day, right? So those are the people that we end up working with the most. But every now and then, a parent will call me to help a child or a teenager, with some behavior or something like this. And we, of course, are very happy to assist, particularly if they are a prior client. We consider them to be our family. But make a long story short, this person asked me the other day a really insightful question. She asked, what is the most difficult situation to work with? And I had to think for just a second, and I remembered, the most difficult situation to work with is actually impossible to work with in my experience. I used to attempt to work with those people when I was younger, but I discovered that we can't, and I think that's the most difficult challenge that we all have. And that is the person who is self-righteous. It's related to like arrogance. That's the person who doesn't think they need to change or doesn't think they need to improve anything. And you might ask me, well, that person wouldn't go into therapy, right? And clearly, no, they wouldn't. The other day I was talking to a man on the telephone because his wife made him call me. And he says, well, I don't have a problem. My problem is my wife. If she changes. And this type of thing, sometimes we almost think it's like funny, but it is actually true. The person does not feel that they have a problem. They are all right. Everything's okay. There's nothing to change. So we call this being self-righteous. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? Isn't that the same thing as confidence? No, being self-righteous is not the same thing as being confident, because we end up creating a lot of damage to everybody around us when we're self-righteous. In other words, when we're always right. We become the pit bull that runs over everybody, and we only think of ourselves ultimately. And because we only think of ourselves, and because in those cases the person doesn't necessarily have the software upstairs to review their actions and make corrections, they keep on going. It's like a freight train that never stops. And in so doing, they keep on creating damage. Well, we're all divine, and conscience is still there. And sooner or later, that conscience begins to wake up, even if it's on our deathbed. Eventually, that conscience begins to wake up, and we begin to look back. And when we look back, we have this thing called regret. It's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I've been blinded for so long. See, the people who have a conscience and they review themselves and they make corrections and adjustments, they make mistakes all the time. Every second, with every breath, there's a new mistake. But there's something different there. They go back, they review, and they make corrections. And there is humbleness in their nature where they're willing to discuss and to talk. Those are the people who do well in therapy. They're willing to look at things differently. How can I do this? How can I improve on that? How could I change? How could I be better to make the situation better? The self-righteous person is not even asking the questions. The self-righteous person never asks a question. They know everything already, and they don't need any input from anybody else. So you might say, are they loners? Do they live by themselves? No, they usually are really good at attracting people to them, but all they need people for is to satisfy whatever local fantasy they're living. In other words, they use the people, literally, for whatever purpose they to have fun, to have an experience, but there's no depth there. The reason why there's no depth is this, because depth in a relationship, in any kind of relationship, comes from the exchange of ideals. When you exchange ideals and you get to know each other, and there's this interpenetration of the souls, we exchange ideals, then we build depth in the relationship. There's complicity, there's understanding, there's a desire to satisfy your needs, and vice versa. You see, there's a cross-fertilization there at the level of the soul and mind that it takes place. Well, the self-righteous person doesn't have that need because they're complete in of themselves. So they have experiences with other people, but only so far as those people can satisfy whatever physical experience they want to live. Inside, they live a very lonely life, a miserable life, because they're completely isolated. So in private, that person might have depression, anxiety, all kinds of problems. Physical illness of all types because there are somatizations of their internal anguish and turmoil. But on the outside, the present is being very confident. And you have to be careful and distinguish confidence from self-righteousness. There's a difference. The confident person is always learning. The self-righteous person never asks a question. They learn, of course, but they learn how to derive better results. They talk a lot about results, and the results they talk about is in the physical world. I got this done, I got this money, I got this business deal, I got this project, but it's only, in other words, if you talk to a self-righteous person and you say, did you do the project? And they say, yes, I did. And you say, why did you do it? They say, well, because I wanted to and I did it, I'm number one and I got paid. You say, I. You wouldn't get a self-righteous person to say, I did the project because when I looked at John and I saw that John was suffering because he couldn't do the project, so my heart went out to John. I'm making this up, right? And so I picked up the project. And I know that I helped John. As an example, you see, the motivation is never to serve another human being. The motivation is always whatever I can get out of this interaction, this project, this situation. That's a self-righteous person. Well, that attitude is rooted in a profound sense of arrogance and dishonesty with the self. And because there's the thick layer of dishonesty and arrogance, you can't really get through therapeutically because the whole process of therapy is a process of self-inquiry. In other words, let me watch. It's like looking in the mirror. Let me watch the effect of my behaviors, my actions on others, and let me make corrections. Let me make adjustments in my way of being. The self-righteous person does not make adjustments ever, particularly not based on the effect they have on others. They don't make adjustments because the world is only a playground to them that is there to satisfy their fantasies. There's no depth, there's no life there, there's no sharing of a heart, there's none of that. The person is right. And as long as you're useful to them, they'll be around. And they'll even play a game where they pretend to please you in some way, depending on the type of interaction that you have. For instance, in therapy, A person might come in with a spouse, and they might play along and listen and ask questions, but you can tell that there's absolutely no dialogue there. There's no depth in there. What we do over here, for instance, if there's a couple, let's say, right, we work with them initially together, but then individually. And as soon as we have that person, could be a man or a woman, individually, alone, confidentially, in the room, closed door, that self-righteous nature, if it's there, not everybody has it, it comes out immediately. Because the moment you ask a few questions, there's the barrier of everything's okay, and there are no questions. There's nothing to change. You ask them, what do you want to change about yourself? Nothing. There's nothing to change. They are all right on their own. So that person, unfortunately, is only setting themselves up for failure. They're not getting better, they're getting worse. They're creating karma the whole time. They're on their way down. They're descending. They're involving. They're not evolving. They're only accumulating more problems, and they have a bleak future. Now, suppose you're listening to me and you say, well, I think he's talking about me. I'm like that, Well, first of all, if you are like that, you wouldn't be listening to any of these videos, because you wouldn't be interested in self-discovery or anything like this. So if you are listening to me right now or any of my videos, obviously this does not apply to you, because this is all about self-inquiry, growth, development, making adjustments, making corrections. So if you're here, clearly this doesn't apply to you. But let's suppose that you are listening to me and you say, well, but I kind of identify with some of the things that you're saying. I'm a little impatient with other people. I think people are too slow for me, and I know what I'm doing. And sometimes people aggravate me because they're too slow, this, that, and the other. What can I do to improve? Well, see, the moment you formulate that question in your mind, wow. You see, there's a question there. There's a desire to learn. You see, you're not the person I'm talking about. So if you're asking yourself that question, all I would suggest to you is this. Close your eyes. If you're not driving, late at night, at home, when you're in a safe place, close your eyes and review your life a little bit. You see, for all of this certainty that we have that we're doing the right thing, and for all of this addiction to results, I'm getting good results in life because I got a better house, a better car, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Ask yourself whether you're indeed getting good results in your life, because it depends on how you define results. If you define the results only in terms of money, career, how do you define results? Ask yourself, what effect am I having on the world, on the people around me? Am I leaving a trail of ugliness and pain and suffering behind me as I go through life? Or am I leaving a trail of happy people, good interactions, great closures, because relationships come to a close, but when they come to a close, there's closure, right? You see, the type of person, the self-righteous person, never offers you closure if you interact with them. Whether they're a client in therapy, whether they're your husband, wife, neighbor, there's never closure. They cut you off, they disappear, there's no closure. Because the interaction meant nothing to them. They don't need the closure. And if you say to that person, okay, you don't need the closure, but I do. Can we talk about what happened? They say, no, I don't need to talk about it. Therefore, I don't care if you need it. You see? There's no conscience there. So very, very difficult situation. That person's on their way down. Now, in a different video, I'm going to talk to you about why the person came into your life. See, our job is to love, forgive, and bless everybody else. And if you recognize that a person with no conscience, as I described, is in your life, then the question for us is, why did I attract a person into my life? It's a much more interesting question. Let's talk about that later. But for now, if you are on that cusp where you say, well, I'm kind of like that, but I'm beginning to ask myself, what could I do different? If you're beginning to ask a question, then do this. Close your eyes one day when you're safe at home and review your life. And if you find that behind you there's a trail of pain and suffering, if you find that you've created suffering in other people's lives, not intentionally, not that it's your fault, but if your interaction with that person resulted in suffering and pain for them, and you're a part of it, not that it's your fault, but if you're a part of it, you see, that pain and suffering that we are a part of, believe it or not, comes with us. We have to make some changes, some adjustments, and ask yourself, what can I do? What changes can I make? You see, notice, I'm suggesting asking questions, and you begin to ask questions and things begin to change for you. Put your comments and your questions below this video, and we're going to talk more about this. This is a very vast topic, and according to your questions, I'll record other videos that explain them. All right? Now remember something. There's magic in life, and we're only getting started. Thank you.